Thanks for being here tonight. I'd like to welcome to the podium Mayor Walsh.
Thank you, Jake. That was nice and easy. I like that. Thank you, Jake, for that introduction. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight on this important conversation, this dialogue. And there's a lot of people I just want to get through real quickly and thank, just because without them, this would not be, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. And there's going to be some people that I'm not mentioning, and that's not by, it's just by accident, because there's so many people in this room that have helped us over the last couple of years with conversations around race and racism, conversations around economic development and inclusion, and so many other conversations. So I just want to thank you all. I want to first of all thank Carol Fulp for the work that she does and that you do every day. So thank you, Carol. I want to thank Jimmy Rooney for making this conversation around equity a business priority every single day, and not just as the head of the chamber. This goes back to Jimmy when he was at the convention center, and probably even before that when he was at the T. So, Jimmy, thank you for, you're right here. Thank you for your conversations. It's funny, myself and Jimmy had, when I first got elected mayor in 2014, one of the first conversations we had was talking about the expansion of the convention center and the hotel and things like that across the street. And he talked about making sure that there's a strong part of that, people of color involved in that conversation. And so I took the RFP that Jimmy had, and we started to incorporate that in some of the things we're doing in the city. And so, you know, this stuff's been going on long before it's become fashionable to talk about it. So, again, Jimmy, thank you for that. Jocelyn Sargent from the Heinz Foundation, thank you for supporting everything that we're doing. You know, Jocelyn is fairly new to the scene, and she's been an absolutely incredible partner in this, in funding, but not to the funding piece, just jumping in with both feet and taking her experiences that she's learned around the country and helping us guide some of what we're doing here in the city of Boston. So thank you very much, Jocelyn, for everything you've done. Dr. Atia Martin, our Chief Resiliency Officer for the City of Boston, she's here as well. And you know, in the beginning, when we started getting this conversation going, officially getting it going, you know, she has met with, has had thousands of conversations in every single corner of the City of Boston, has been recognized for her great work by Rockefeller. It's funny, when we were in Washington, D.C., we were talking about the Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities, and they're all talking about like the energy and environment, and up comes Atia talking about race and racism, and it's really incredible to see it happening. So thank you for your great work. We have two guests that are here tonight. I don't see the mayor, but we have two guests from Belfast. We have the city manager, Susan Wiley, with us. Thank you, Susan, for being with us tonight. And we have Councillor O'Donnell with us. Thank you, Councillor, for being with us tonight as well, from Belfast. And before I get into my formal remarks, one thing I just want to say about Belfast, it's remarkable the comparisons between what's happening in the north, between the Catholics and the Protestants, and the race dialogues and race conversation and racism that we have here in America. And you know, you can just move the names of the different people around, and the conversation can be very similar, and it's very complicated. It's a very passionate issue, and I want to thank Belfast for being here, because in a lot of ways we can learn from what you did on the Good Friday Peace Agreement and what you do every single day. And one quick example is the councillor represents parts of East Belfast, and right, you're part of, no, you're more than north of Belfast. You're East Belfast, and we were there. I was there my first year as mayor, second, whatever it was. And we went to this cultural center there, and those of you that don't know, okay, if you're a Catholic, you're supposedly associated with the Irish, and your flag is green, white, and orange, green, white, and gold, green, white, and orange. And if you're a Protestant, you're associated with England, and your flag is red, white, and blue. Even though the whole fight with Northern Ireland didn't stop between the Catholics and the Protestants, it was actually people pulling away from the English government, but somewhere along the line it became Catholic Protestant. Well, if you go to East Belfast, the cultural center, on the wall there's an outdoor garden. And that outdoor garden is filled with beautiful flowers of all different colors. And there's a couple colors missing. There's green and orange missing from that wall, and there's red and blue missing from that wall. And the intention behind the Peace Garden is to have basically a neutral area of peace it's sending a very strong message. East Belfast historically has been predominantly Protestant, if I'm not mistaken. So it's kind of like it's a message being sent in a positive way. And I think that we can learn a lot from these different messages that we're seeing around the world in different places. So thank you for being here with us today.
Wow.
I'm pleased also, I want to thank everyone on this panel on advancing economic inclusion in the business community. Thank you for being here. We've made some progress in that direction in our city, but we certainly have more work to do in both the public and the private sectors. At City Hall, we started by appointing diverse leaders. We changed hiring practices to reflect the Boston population, and I could go into a whole bunch of people, and I don't want to embarrass you, but I want to talk about Carolyn Crockett, what she does at economic development, Donnie Tavares, what he does at the Office of Diversity, Lauren Jones come in here also with economic development, thank you. The Office of Diversity to create pipelines into government. We established transparency with our diversity dashboard. Those of you that want to see it, just go right out cityofboston.gov. You pull it up. Our numbers are right there. We're not hiding. Our numbers are right there. And if you search around there, you can find the different salaries that's happening. And our numbers are changing, but sometimes they're not changing quick enough that I would like to see them move faster if ways we could. But our systems are certainly moving in the right direction. We also changed the programs that affect the public-private sector with opportunities, economic inclusion, and equity agenda, making sure that we continue to work in the private sector. We placed our Office of Small Business Centers in neighborhoods of color like Mattapan, and we're working on a second office that will be opening sometime soon. We raised the targets for the Boston Jobs Residency Policy on construction projects. And we've worked on setting new records as far as inclusion on developments. We looked at the numbers, and the numbers were 50, 25, and 10. What does that mean? 50% Boston residents, 25% people of color, and 10% women. And we sat down with community activists and leaders, and we changed those numbers to 51% Boston residents, 40% people of color, and 12% women. The reason why the women number is only 12% is we're going to go back and revisit that to try and build a pipeline, because we don't have a pipeline, a big enough pipeline for women into that industry, so we're going to continue to work on that. We put out RFPs for a disparity study on procurement. We're also it's going to give us a roadmap to achieving equity in contracting. I'm grateful for the Chamber for also tackling this challenging. Diversifying supply chains is not only the right thing to do, but it also makes our economy stronger and our ability to attract and develop more talent. But to step back for a moment, this conversation is an essential piece of a larger conversation that Boston is having. We're recognizing that centuries of unequal treatment created unequal systems all across our nation. We're identifying the local barriers, and we're figuring out how to tear those barriers down and make sure Boston truly is a city for everybody. As our resiliency strategy has taught us, a city that works for all of us, a city that can withstand the shock and stresses of the 21st century. It's not just climate change and natural disasters. It's also economic shock and technological change and the negativity in national politics. When we stand together, we stand for something better. We've made some progress in the city, but we have more progress to go. This morning, we launched a program over with the WeBoss. It's a women's program regarding venture capitalist money. And I was shocked this morning. I don't know why I was shocked, but I was shocked that 9% of venture capital money is spent on women-owned businesses. That's it, 9%. And if you look at people of color, black people in particular, it's 0.2%. So you think about the money that's being spent by venture capitals. So we do have work to do in our city and in our country, but I'm focused on our city. We're going to continue to fight to make sure we make those changes. I also want to thank everyone for being in this room. Once again, thank you for being here tonight. And I encourage you to think actively about how to implement these ideas in your organization. But we want to make sure that our conversations are not just words. It's actually a citywide movement of positive change. We have talked too long. Elected officials have stood at microphones like this for a long time and made these promises and talked about inclusion and talked about tackling these issues. And I'm proud of the work that's been going on in the city of Boston in the last 3.5 years in the city. We're going to continue to move forward in this work, and thank you for being here tonight. Now, I'm bringing up Jocelyn, right? And I should have saved the introduction. I get the great pleasure of bringing up Jocelyn Sargent, who is the head of Hyams Foundation, but she's supporting the dialogues that we have. And as I said earlier, if you came in a few minutes late, Jocelyn's been an incredible resource for me personally, because she has had a chance to see what's happening in different parts of the country and kind of see what's happening in Boston, and be able to navigate some tough situations and help us to prepare for some tough conversations. So, Jocelyn, come on.
Thank you, Mayor Walsh. I just would like to appreciate such a wonderful and warm welcome. This city, I haven't been here long, but there is this unfair perception of Boston as unfriendly, and you can't prove that by me. This has been such a warm and inclusive experience, and I'm so proud to be here. I want to thank all of you who've come out tonight for this important panel discussion. And before I start, I want to start with a quote actually from a Bostonian who's also an American author, historian, and Unitarian minister, Edward Everett Hale. So probably many of you know of him. Among his many contributions, he was a staunch advocate for the abolition of enslavement, of enslaved people in this country. He envisioned a ministry that would challenge the status quo. He fought not only for the freedom of enslaved people, but also for their equal rights. And here's a quote that he used quite often, and I've heard repeated many times, and it feels so apt for tonight. It is, I am only one. I am only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And what I can do, I ought to do. And what I ought to do, by the grace of God, I shall do. I am only one, but I am one. So I want us to kind of think about that as we go into today's program. I'm so honored to be here tonight and to take part of this discussion because it relates to the core work of the Hyams Foundation. The Hyams Foundation has devoted itself to advancing equality and justice for all. For the past decade, the Hyams Foundation has been funding local organizations that work to eradicate the school-to-prison pipeline, economic and housing inequality, and to address urgent issues such as threats to our immigrant and refugee families and community. And we know through experience and evidence that ensuring equal opportunity for all Bostonians is not only the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do. Take, for example, the case for diversity in business. According to the 2015 Diversity Matters report published by McKinsey & Company, businesses with more diverse workforces see greater financial returns. Another study found that companies in the top quartile for racial and economic diversity were 35% more likely to have financial returns, above the national industry median. This data was again reconfirmed by a report by PolicyLink. I brought it. It is currently online. It was released earlier this month, October 2nd, by PolicyLink and FSG. And what we're finding is all this confluence of evidence that we really need to push forward the issues of diversity and racial equity. However, before we achieve a truly diverse workforce and a truly equitable society, we must first identify and remedy obstacles that stand in our way. This is why we have been hard at work to make the Dialogue to Action series, our partnership that the mayor mentioned earlier, our partnership with the mayor's office, and we want to make the Dialogues to Action a reality. We've been selecting facilitators to lead these conversations. We've been researching the ways that racial inequality impact our diverse neighborhoods and Boston as a whole. And we've been thinking about shaping the format of these dialogues so there are spaces of learning that identify actionable steps. With this approach, we can all move forward together. This will, however, require the participation of all sectors, including philanthropy, the business sector, government, and education. But we're a can-do city, and I know that together we will make progress. But bringing us back to the panel tonight, I think it's important that we acknowledge that we have the data that says diversity, inclusion, and equity is good for business. So the next question is, how do we operationalize this information in a way that advances equity? How can the private sector work with the nonprofit and public sectors to advance racial justice on a more systemic level? With the Edward Hill quote in mind, I'd like us now to think about what we ought to do. And to take us further down that road, I'd now like to introduce my dear colleague, Jim Rooney, President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, to share his insights on these questions and the important role that the business community plays in achieving racial justice and equity.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Jocelyn, for that kind introductions, and thank you to the Hyams Foundation for your partnership with the City of Boston and with the Chamber in helping us tackle the tough conversations about racism and in moving these conversations to action so that we can continue to move the dial on inequality and economic opportunity. I also want to give a big shout out to Mayor Walsh and his entire team, Dr. Martin, for their remarkable leadership on these efforts, not just for putting tonight's program together, but for having the courage over the past 3 years to openly lead this city on a shared journey of learning about our racial history and race relations. Race can be a politically risky issue for a mayor to take on, so it does take some courage. But we all know that true change starts at the top. So without Mayor Walsh starting the dialogue and organizing events like the one tonight, we cannot continue to make the progress that we've seen and that we want to see. Just over a year ago, in his annual address to the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, Mayor Walsh did something that I believe no mayor of Boston has ever done before. He called on the business community to be his partner on this journey to end racism and ensure that Boston becomes a city where all can succeed. Thank you for that leadership, Mayor. In fact, this challenge has become the heart of what we do at the Greater Boston Chamber, which is to work with our diverse and collaborative membership, as well as with our city and state leadership to ensure that Boston is the best place for all businesses and for all people to thrive. Creating racial equity and economic opportunity is critical to this purpose and to the long-term success of our economy, which is why at the Chamber we are focused on this issue as a top public policy priority and in all of our offerings, from our events to our leadership development programs to our internship initiatives and more. In fact, earlier this year, we formed the first Economic Opportunity Committee in the Chamber's 106-year history, led by members of our Executive Committee. Through the focus and dedication of this committee, we've already launched 2 new programs aimed at moving the dial on equity. The first is our Pacesetters program, modeled after a successful program in Cincinnati, which works to advance economic inclusion through expanded access to corporate procurement opportunities for minority-owned businesses. Our Chamber Pacesetters will be large and mid-sized corporations or anchor institutions like hospitals and universities, all Chamber member organizations that will commit to increasing their MBE procurement spend. We're getting our Pacesetters lined up now. We'll announce the first group of Pacesetters in December and launch the program in January of 2018. We've also partnered with the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston on a new initiative we're calling Redefining Talent. This internship effort will focus on removing barriers from entry-level professional jobs to senior management roles for students and professionals of color. We believe that internships are a pathway into the labor market and up the career ladder. We also believe that creating this diverse talent pipeline is crucial to Boston's reputation as a hub of talent, and we must provide opportunities for all of our residents to get critical access and experience that develops them for the jobs of Boston's future. The most important point that I want to make tonight from a business community perspective is that creating racial equity and economic opportunity for all in Boston is not just the right thing to do. It's a 21st century Boston business necessity and a competitive imperative. Our chamber members know that Boston cannot continue to be a competitive city for business and an economically strong city when we have the largest income divide in the United States. We cannot attract and retain talent if we continue to be haunted by the perception that Boston is a racist and discriminatory city. We cannot put our best team of talent on the field of global competition if our young professionals of color feel like they have less opportunities to succeed or grow their careers in our city. So today, my message to you is that the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce and the business community is all in on this issue. In fact, beyond what we are doing as a group at the Chamber, we're encouraging our members to forge ahead with their own corporate initiatives aimed at creating economic opportunity, and several are already doing that. You're going to hear from 3 of those on our panel tonight at Keolis, Boston Scientific, and Tufts Health Plan. But programs like State Street's Boston Wins, a multi-year philanthropic initiative focused on bringing systems change and innovation to the future talent pipeline through internships to thousands of BPS students and graduates, and a commitment to ensuring that Boston youth are college-ready and career-ready. And Eastern Bank, who is a tremendous partner in our Pacesetters program with their Business Equity Initiative, or BEI, which was launched this year, that accelerates the growth of local enterprises of color to direct impact and drive an increase in job opportunities and wealth creation in Boston's neighborhoods. These are just 2 of the incredible businesses in our community who are stepping up to the challenge for the betterment of Boston and its people. This effort is about coming together and working together. We need partnerships and we need collaboration. We can no longer just look to government to solve our most pressing social issues. All stakeholders must be at the table and must invest dollars, invest time, invest sweat, and invest equity in solution making. For the business community, it's about identifying the areas that we are best poised to change and then changing them. It means advocacy and speaking loudly for public policy proposals that would create systemic change and incentives for economic opportunity and growth. I'm grateful that we have a mayor and Mayor Walsh as a leader, and organizations like the Hyams Foundation, the Bar Foundation, the Boston Foundation as key partners in our efforts. And I'm happy to be a part of tonight in this ongoing effort. Thank you. And we're lucky to have one other amazing organization included in this partnership, and it is the partnership, which leads me to introduce our moderator tonight. I've got the great pleasure of introducing Carol Fulp, my longtime friend and colleague, and I'll add, a 2017 inductee into the Chamber's Academy of Distinguished Bostonians. As President and CEO of the partnership, Carol oversees the organization's mission of enhancing the competitiveness of the region by attracting, developing, and retaining and convening multicultural professionals. Prior to the partnership, Carol was the Senior VP of Corporate Responsibility and Brand Management at the John Hancock Financial Company, where she led marketing and sponsorships while directing the company's $12 million philanthropic giving program. And given her leadership in business and public service, President Obama appointed her as a representative of the United States of America for the 65th session of the United Nations General Assembly. She's an incredibly civically engaged member of our community, serves on a number of local and national boards, and she's the perfect person to lead tonight's panel discussion. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Carol Fulp.
Thank you. And Jim, first of all, thank you for all the work you do in our community. And this is not your grandfather's Chamber of Commerce. Am I right? I think that I too would just like to say words of thanks to Mayor Walsh. I'm going to look at this first from a partnership perspective. The mayor has been in conversation with our chair, Ralph Martin, at our annual meeting at the partnership, and we're thrilled that he gave his time and talked so poignantly and personally about the issue of diversity, and in particular, growing up during the era of busing and the scar that's really left on our city. I want to also acknowledge Jocelyn Sargent. Jocelyn is a wonderful addition to our community. She's a member of the partnership's C-Suite program. We're so thrilled you're with us. And I am so delighted that you indicated that we get a bad rap in Boston and that we are indeed welcoming. And thank you for being here, and thank you for the leadership you provide, and thank you for helping us really display who we really are. So you continue to shout out that Boston is welcome. And Jim, I just want to say before I introduce our panel, we are delighted to have you on the partnership board for a decade now. So I think that really demonstrates your long-time commitment to diversity. So all three of our hosts tonight are related to the partnership. So thank you. We like to think everyone's related to the partnership, truth be told. And in doing so, I have the opportunity to introduce our panelists. First, you must meet Juan Lopera. I've had the opportunity to get to know Juan as he serves as the Vice President of Business Diversity for Tufts Health Plan. He's responsible for the corporate-wide diversity efforts to identify and to implement strategies to grow Tufts' presence in diverse communities amongst its members, its providers, its brokers, employers, employees, and its vendors. We also must say hello to my good friend Rita Hardiman. Rita is Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Keolis Commuter Services. She'll tell you a little bit more about her CEO, who we are most proud of as well. As you know, Keolis operates and maintains the MBTA commuter rail service, and it carries nearly 130,000 passengers each day. Rita is responsible for managing Keolis's supplier diversity program. She's responsible for attracting, retaining, and developing a diverse talent base of 2,100 employees. Thank you, Rita. We look forward to hearing from you. And then I must introduce you to Emily Cournoyer. Emily is Director of Talent Acquisition for Boston Scientific, a very important industry here in our Commonwealth. our Commonwealth has the largest industry when it comes to life sciences in North America. The largest life sciences industry in North America. And so we want to hear from Emily, as she's the global director of talent acquisition for Boston Scientific. This company, that is a medical device company, employs 27,000 employees around the world. And she is responsible for ensuring that this organization reflects the diversity of the world. Please help me welcome Juan, Rita, and Emily. So tonight we're going to have a conversation. Clearly, it has been stated that diversity is not the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. But we know that, don't we? We also know it's complex. But we'd really like to have a really intimate conversation about the challenges that diversity brings. And one of the things that Jim Rooney said he wanted to get out of this session was to talk about the fact that, yes, we've engaged in a lot of conversation, but what's the action we now need to take? And so we need to admit our challenges and focus on what we need to do to really build a 21st century economy. So with that in mind, Juan, I'd like to ask you, in your perspective at Tufts, what's the business advantage of diversity? How does it play out at Tufts?
Great. Thank you, Carol, for that question, and good evening. Seems like the heat may not be turned on quite yet, but fall is here, so hopefully folks got a chance to get out and enjoy the beautiful weather this weekend, fall-like weather. So thank you. For those of you not familiar with Tufts Health Plan, health insurance company based out of Watertown, Massachusetts, not too far from here. We have over 1 million members and uniquely positioned as a health insurance company because we cover everyone regardless of circumstance and age. We have Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial insurance. So that, I think, positions us in a unique way to look at race from both how we internally reflect the racial makeup of our employees, but more importantly, how we better serve a growing diversity of our membership across the spectrum of income, age, and every circumstance of life. So the way we looked at this question of how race and business intersect is, and really how my role came about 2 years ago, because I was not a diversity practitioner. I grew up in the business of healthcare, making healthcare more affordable and more accessible, higher quality. But then when I saw the data we all see, which is the census data that shows that that our ethnically diverse communities are the fastest growing and the biggest contributors to our economy, we did the math and we said, if we're a health insurance company, what is the business case? And we put pen to paper, and it was worth about $2.2 billion in revenue to our company to close what we found as a gap about 3 years ago in the makeup of our membership in terms of the ethnic diversity of our membership. So that was a big wake-up call for us and for our CFO and our senior leaders to say, this is a big opportunity to really tap into these growing communities. And then furthermore, if you think of the fact that we're a health insurance company, we also looked at what is the health profile of the ethnic communities in Boston and in Massachusetts and where we do business. And we found that there are healthcare disparities that as a health plan we needed to address. So it made a lot of business sense It wasn't just the right thing to do, and it is. It is tied to our mission, but also it was tied to our margin because we saw a big opportunity of worth about 2.2 billion in revenue and significant membership that we saw as a plan. So it made sense from both a mission and a margin standpoint.
So back to Jim's point about action. Have you seen a difference when you explain this issue of diversity from a business perspective as before, where diversity wasn't tied to business? And what does that look like in your organization?
Certainly. So tying it to the business, what it did for us is it brought everybody under the tent on the diversity topic. In many organizations, diversity tends to be an issue that's isolated to those who are diverse. The reality is it should be an issue that impacts all 2,600 of our employees, all the way up to our CEO, Tom Crossbolt. So there was a level of commitment when people realized that it was something that was tied to our business. So in doing that, you get a lot of allies. You get every department to want to contribute. If you're sitting in finance and if you're in purchasing, suddenly you want to contribute to supplier diversity. If you're in the clinical area of Tufts Health Plan, you want to contribute to issues related to health disparities that impact our diverse members. So you're able to connect everyone to the topic of diversity and not just the individuals who happen to be diverse.
Mm-hmm. I've heard it said that companies that don't embrace diversity vigorously will find that their competitors will, and their competitors will win. And one professor indicated you're going to see in 10 years, companies are really going to fall by the wayside because they're not competitive. So this really is a business imperative. Thank you. Keolis, tell us how it's a business imperative, Rita, at Keolis.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that, Keolis operates the commuter rail in Boston. The larger company that we're part of is global, and it's in 16 countries around the world. So it would be very difficult to run a business and to provide a service to people in any country or any large city around the world if you don't understand who your customer is, if you don't understand the culture of the country in which you are working or the community in which you're working. And if you don't avail yourself of the talent and the staff, the employees that staff the organization. So when I think about what's the business advantage to the company and locally in the Boston community, we wouldn't be able to run trains unless we paid attention to diversity. A couple of reasons. One is about 27% of our workforce are people of color. And so that's a significant percentage of the workforce that we rely upon every day, that are part of what makes the trains run, keeps them maintained, pays the bills, has payroll, does environmental work that we're engaged in. So we literally couldn't operate. And I think that any business that doesn't recognize the diversity of its customer base and respect that customer base and mirror that customer base isn't going to be in operation for very long either. We also recognize that this community that we're in, Massachusetts actually as a whole, is an area with a very large immigrant population from countries all over the world. I'm the grandchild of immigrants myself. And one of the obligations that we have as a public service, as a public entity, which transportation is, it's a civil right, is that if we're serving people who live here and have decided to reside in the U.S. from all over the world, we also have to be able to speak different languages. So part of the advantage for us is attracting and hiring employees who are bilingual, who are multilingual, and who are multicultural, who not only understand the language or the words, but actually understand the culture of the people who are riding our trains. So that's one piece of it.
Thank you. Emily, you're head of talent acquisition. And at the end of the day, companies just want to hire the best talent of all kinds. And as we said, if you don't, your competitors will, and they'll win. So how does Boston Scientific attract the best talent of all kinds? How does Boston Scientific attract diverse talent?
Thank you very much for having me this evening, and it's a pleasure to be here. You know, it is a competitive landscape. There's just no two ways about it. And at Boston Scientific, we look for strong partnerships to help us identify talent from all different groups across the state and the country and the globe. We're also faced with the difficulty of looking for individuals that are in the STEM fields, right? So science, technology, engineering, and math. And in those fields, we're really looking for talent that can be innovative and have a diversity of thought, because at the end of the day, we're looking for individuals that will help us develop products that will change patients' lives. So at Boston Scientific, we've established some partnerships with different groups to help us attract talent. At the university level, we've established relationships locally with universities and colleges, but also have identified the importance for us to have relationships with the historically black colleges, because people may or may not know, while those colleges represent about 4% of individuals who graduate with engineering degrees, they represent 30% of the diverse population graduating with those degrees. So it was important for us to establish strong relationships with those colleges and universities, and really think about how we can attract the students into our programs, develop and retain them for the long haul with Boston Scientific.
Thank you. And speaking of attracting talent, you know, I'm really proud of the talent that Keolis has attracted. So Rita, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about the top of your house.
Sure. So the president of Keolis Commuter Services is sitting in the back, and I'm happy that he's there, my boss. And Gerald Francis has a long career in public transportation in the United States. So Keolis was very lucky to hire him and have him come to Boston from the Washington metropolitan area, most recently, to head up the operation in Keolis. So I want to say a little bit about the importance of leadership, because in reporting to Gerald, I knew that I had an ally, I knew that I had an advocate, I knew that I actually had someone to be accountable to in fulfilling the responsibilities of my job in supplier diversity, who knew a thing or two about leading on diversity and inclusion. So very happy to be part of that organization and happy that he's been chosen to lead it. So,
and Gerald, please stand up. Gerald is also on the executive committee of the Chamber of Commerce, and we're thrilled that he's here in Boston. So Gerald, thank you. And a plug for the partnership, he's in our C-suite program. So thank you. So let's be frank. Let's talk about what we're not doing. Business is tough. Funds are tight. How do you see that currently impacting diversity? Juan, you want to take that?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you that unless diversity is connected to the business and to what it is that your organization does, I'm afraid that when budgets are tight, the focus may be less on diversity and inclusion programs. Why do I say that? If it's purely about checking the box and about simply doing the HR thing, which is hiring people of color, which is important, but if it's not sort of connected to everything that an organization does as a business, then then it becomes less relevant to the business when business gets tough. So I would urge whatever organization you're in to sort of look at what it is you produce, you do as a business, and then figure out how to connect it to that bottom line impact, because then suddenly it has the longevity that you need, because it's critical to the revenue for your organization, the products that you produce. If you're able to make that connection, it's easier said than done for certain industries. I'd say healthcare is something we all need. So recognizing that individuals from a particular background consume healthcare differently, have different quality outcomes in healthcare. I think it's maybe an easier case to make in terms of how it impacts business, but I think every business, whether it's Boston Scientific, certainly the MBTA, there's an aspect that we all need to look at through a consumer lens, and then realize that when you look out 5 years, 10 years, the communities of color are the ones who are going to be holding the biggest purchasing bag for whatever goods we'll sell. So being able to connect it to business then makes everything else work, I think, in my opinion.
And I think as individuals who really care passionately about diversity, it's really up to us to constantly advocate in terms of the business case. Right now, there are more babies of color born in this country than Caucasian babies. I think it's important that our organizations know that. By 2042, there will be more people of color in this country than Caucasians. I think it's important for our organizations to know that. The country is becoming increasingly browner and browner. And that's our marketplace, and that's our workforce. And unless we have this kind of culture in our organization that can attract and retain this talent, again, we're going to lose. But while all of us and all in the audience really value this issue of diversity, Rita, let me ask you, what are we not doing?
So I want to first say what we are doing and also illustrate what we're not doing. So before coming to Keolis, I think you know, Carol, I had worked with a number of other large corporations around the United States. And one of the things that a lot of organizations don't do is that they don't tie performance on diversity to performance reviews, to performance management for their leadership or their managers in general. I worked in organizations where I saw people get enormous bonuses and merit payments for achieving financial results, for achieving other kinds of results. But diversity and inclusion was not included in that. And so I'm happy to say that we do measure that in terms of our company, in terms of progress on diversity. So the managers are expected to participate in diversity and inclusion efforts and to make strides, not only in utilization of diverse suppliers, but in attracting, retaining, and developing talent. But oftentimes that is not the case. The other thing that I think we're not doing is I don't think that we're reaching out enough to businesses that have minority ownership to be clear with them about how to do business with larger corporations. And I say that because I was a minority member of a company that was owned by people of color. So I was the white person in the company.
You were the minority.
I was. And in trying to link with larger corporations and trying to do business with organizations, it's an interesting relationship. It's an interesting conversation to figure out as a supplier or as a service provider or a provider of consulting services or anything like that, to have encounters with large corporations that can be very intimidating, and to break down those walls, to have that conversation about what is it we're looking for in the people that sell things to us or provide services to us, and what can you offer? And then how can we have a dialogue that helps bridge the gap between what a small company is able to provide and what a larger company is interested in buying, and how do we bridge that? And I think, to one of your earlier points, it is about partnering with nonprofit organizations that have as their mission the growth and development of diverse suppliers. And there's a number of good ones in the greater Boston area. The Greater New England Minority Supplier Development does a lot of work in that area. The Center for Women in Enterprise does with women's organizations. So they are very invested in helping those small organizations owned by women, by people of color, grow their capacity to be able to play with, the bigger organizations, bigger corporations.
And so much in corporate is focused on finances, and so the challenge with suppliers is that as you become a global company, you can then look at a global organization for your contracts around the globe. So the importance of having that voice for being able to ensure we're using local talent, talent of color, and female talent is so important because you can so easily use an organization that for the price, because they're so large, can give you a deeper cut. And to your point, there are other benefits than finances. Juan, did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, just to add to that, and I think this is an opportunity of something we're not doing enough of in the space of supplier diversity, is tell that value story, right? I think we say is the right thing to do. It aligns with mission, but what we're not doing enough, and I think we have a very compelling case, and in fact, Jim Rooney and the work being done at the Chamber is working on this based on the model Jim referenced from Cincinnati, where they've been able to calculate the ROI and the value behind supplier diversity. They have a way to quantify the innovation that comes from the work. They're able to quantify the better pricing that comes from that work, able to quantify the impact on the organization for being able to build those relationships. So we're not doing enough of that, certainly not at my organization, but in the collaboration with the Chamber, we're looking to do more of that. We're also not doing enough, at least in the private sector, being transparent about these great goals that we all have. Many more of us are starting to say this is not just the right thing to do, but good for business. Well, let's tell that story. Let's be transparent about that story. Let's say here's the goal that we have, and be comfortable with that. Oftentimes, the private sector is just not comfortable in that space. So I think there's a number of things we're not doing enough of, but I think with leadership like the one you have here in the room, we're going to get there.
I'm sure this room will help you get there. Emily, what are we not doing in life sciences, STEM and kids of color? How can we create a greater path to this industry of the future?
It's a great question, and I'm really excited about the fact that there has been some attention put on this. Certainly, the educational programs in the state are much more focused on this. And at Boston Scientific, we've again engaged with some organizations to help pull through individuals, whether it's through mentorship or identification of individuals who have interest in our area, where we're sponsoring some activities. So we've partnered with Girls Inc. To identify students who have expressed interest earlier in career and really put our arms around those individuals to sort of say there's opportunities in this space to make a career in the STEM activities. I would also say, to be fair, there's more we can do. We have employee resource groups that represent all different diversity in our organization, and they're very engaged with how they can represent Boston Scientific into these communities much more actively. I also think that as an organization, much like you were talking about around measuring our performance, it's an area where we can continue to improve. And when we think about Attract, it's really not only just about the identification of individuals, but sort of thinking through what are we doing to continue to engage those communities? What are we doing to help develop the advancement of their skills so that they can move through their career with the organization?
Rita, you mentioned the importance of performance and tying diversity performance to one's bonus. State Street has actually initiated a program where they tie diversity performance to bonuses, and obviously people take note of that. Employees take note of that, managers take note of it. Pepsi, I'll give you a story. Pepsi's CEO tied diversity performance to bonus. And in fact, one year, finances were good. Diversity performance wasn't. The organization, the board, wanted to give the CEO a big bonus. And the CEO said, no, I shouldn't get it because I haven't reached my diversity goals. So they didn't get the biggest bonus, and guess what? Neither did the managers who reported to them. And so as a result, you know what happened the next year. So that's action, and that's leadership at the very top. And so I wanted to make sure to tell those stories because it does help. It does help. And so when we look at the STEM field and we look at the statistics, and we're very concerned about them, and we value the program that Boston Scientific has with historically black colleges, but we're also aware that only 4% of interns in the STEM industry are black. And so we have to focus on this. We have to talk about the numbers, and we have to ask for help. And really, your point about ERGs, employee resource groups, is so powerful. And I'll give you an example. You look at IBM, and they had, in this case, a disability ERG group. And they said, we have a way that we can make our products really comply with diversity. And they convinced their business to do it, and as a result, their business was able to apply for government grants that they would not have otherwise done, and their dollars went up. Their bottom line was impacted. So I encourage all of us to think about the challenges that we have in all of our organizations, and how can we tie that dollar to it. Because these problems are systemic. We know that. They're incredibly challenging. But it's amazing what happens when we can tie dollars to a problem. Juan, did you want to say something?
I mean, just reminded me of a story related to this point of making diversity a strategic priority and tying compensation to it for senior leadership. Is that you're able to do things that in the past you would never even discuss internally. So the example is about a year and a half ago, we had one of our members who'd received a brochure about women's health issues. And this was one of our members who was a transgender member who had gone from female to male and received a women's health brochure, like we send to anyone who on our system shows up as female, because there are specific screening tests that women have to have done. And this particular member was offended by the fact that the brochure did not correspond with the sexual orientation, gender identity, and posted on our Facebook page about how uncomfortable they felt about this and the displeasure they had. So because diversity was a top priority for us, inclusive of race, sexual orientation, gender identity, we immediately learned from that. We contacted the member and said if they would work with us to enhance the experience for our transgender members. And quickly, we were able to get a work group in place to begin to change the way we capture information about sexual orientation, gender identity, preferred name, things that in the past would never even be discussed because people were uncomfortable with topics like this. And I'm sure many and most organizations would be, but because diversity was a key priority for the organization, people wanted to do the right thing, and we quickly were able to put in place the effort. And guess what? It makes business sense because we then started realizing that a number of our employers had in the RFPs for the health insurance company questions about what are you doing about transgender health. So it made business sense, but in this case, it made sense for this individual member.
And think how you empowered your employees. And they're more likely to stay with you because you enable them to convene and be a part of the business in a very different way. Rita?
I have another,
yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because I have a slightly different example, but relates to it. So we're all familiar in the last few days, I think, with the major faux pas that Dove soap was involved in with that commercial where yeah, we know that. Okay. So, and I'm sure they've lost quite a bit of sales of Dove soap because of that mistake. So one of the things that happened in our organization was we got an example of an ad that was sent from another part of the world that was used effectively in another country to communicate to young girls and to women that there were careers in transportation. So this is about attracting talent. And I looked at the ad and I showed it to a number of our employees and I said, this is what's been suggested. We just change the name, change the location to Boston and use this ad. We don't have to produce a new one. And I shared it with a couple of colleagues and they had the same reaction that I did that said, absolutely not. This will not fly in Boston. This will not fly in the United States of America. And so we didn't use it, but it was the same situation of going to our other employees and saying, what do you think about this image? And what do you think it's communicating? And it comes from another place. And they said, well, I can't imagine this working anywhere, but it did. It was very effective in another country, but it was not effective here. And it wasn't a racist message per se, and it wasn't really a sexist message necessarily per se, but it was just, ugh, it just was flat. And so when you listen to your employees, when you listen to people of different backgrounds, and the power of an image is very, very powerful, as we know in advertising. And so we didn't use it. We said this is not the right approach to take here. We need to go a different way. Yeah.
It's a great point. I just would add on to that. We've done similar work with our ERGs when we've tested different advertising campaigns from a recruitment perspective. But when our friends in marketing found out about it, they were immediately thinking, well, we should be doing that with all of our product ads. Right. So it was a really interesting connection point internally for people to make. I would also say it really represents the diverse thinking component around diversity and the importance of it and the criticalness of it. And so you mentioned the disability ERG. We have asked that group to look at our career site as an example, our website for accessibility in ways that we wouldn't maybe necessarily understand. So just another way to leverage your internal populations. Sure.
So there is a new acronym out, a new term out called CQ. Have you heard of it? You have IQ for intelligence, EQ for emotional intelligence, and CQ for cultural intelligence. You know, are you sensitive to various cultures? So that when you're in the workforce, do you have cultural intelligence? And Rita, your antennas went up when you saw the potential ad that was suggested, run. And that story actually reminds me of a story that Colette told me decades ago, Colette, when we were at the ad club, on the ad club board together. Colette told a story that Chevy, I believe it was, had a very trendy and really great selling car here in America called Nova, am I right? Nova, and it was selling great, it was doing really well, and they decided to sell it in Mexico. They had cars that they were selling in Mexico, and they said, why not? Let's try this one there. But as Colette tells the story, that didn't work out too well, because in that particular culture, Nova meant no go. That's why it's important to have diversity in your organizations, because someone with a diverse perspective of that particular area where you wanted to introduce a new product would have told you that sensitivity. So you can imagine the dollars that were lost there and the embarrassment, because I remembered that story 20 years later. So thank you, Colette. Thank you. Before we go to questions and answers, I wanted to ask you what you wanted to make sure you left the audience with tonight. This is your conversation, a chance to hear from you, and we want to hear something you want to leave the audience with. The work's hard. I like to think of this issue of diversity as a journey, not a destination. Each organization is on a particular place on the spectrum. The question is, where are you on the spectrum? And how do you continue to advance? And so as panelists tonight, I'd like to ask you for your thoughts and perspectives as you end this part of our panel discussion. So Emily, let's start with you, our talent acquisition global leader here.
So I'm really pleased to hear about the action that's happening, you know, with my panelists here, and I'm interested to hear in the room as well. And I think that for us, it's about how do you sustain that over time? Because while it's important to celebrate the wins that you have as an organization and really shine a light on what those wins are, we really have to continue this work forward. We're really talking about culture change. Mm-hmm. We're really talking about generational change, building a pipeline of future leaders. So while my job is really about getting people sort of through that door, it's important that organizations think about how are we continuing to pull that talent through their career with an organization, and that will take time and commitment. I'm really pleased to say the CEO that I work for, Mike Mahoney, is personally committed to this work. This past summer, he signed a CEO Action for Diversity with over 300 other CEOs across the country.
Tell folks a little bit about that new initiative.
So this is a group of people who really have made a commitment to diversity in their organizations. And there are 3 pillars. It's about you know, creating an environment where people are comfortable and can bring their best selves to work. It's about learning from each other. And it's about ensuring that this trusting workplace is the workplace of the future for who we are as an organization. And so, you know, when your CEO talks about that and creates that kind of environment, people feel safe to be who they are and be present. And it allows them, when they're spending many hours a day there, to stay focused on the work at hand.
So a national initiative where over 300 CEOs have signed this action pledge. Thank you. Rita.
Let's see. It's so much to say, but I guess what I would say is that I'm working in a very challenging industry. That's challenging for a lot of reasons. I think it's going through dramatic technological change. This region of the world in particular is decades, if not a century, behind modern transportation in other parts of the world. So, right, is a century fair? I'm looking at Jim Rudy, who has worked for the MBTA before. But so, I mean, one of the challenges is changing quickly and getting up to speed very quickly because it's so crucial to the economy. And a part of that is also, it's an old industry. And it's personally challenging for me on the diversity side of things because in the railroad industry in general, there's only 15% women in the industry. And despite a long history of African Americans in particular working in transportation, we still don't have a representative workforce of people of color in the workforce of the railroad. And a part of that is related to that it's an old industry and it has a culture, a history that goes back before the Civil War. And so one of the things we're dealing with is also culture change around diversity. The railroad prides itself, in some ways it's almost like the mining industry, that if your grandfather or great-grandfather worked in the railroad or in transportation or for the MBTA, your grandson was going to work there, your son and your grandson and so forth. And when you have a legacy of an industry that's not only male-dominated but white-dominated, it can be very, very challenging to begin to change that culture. And it's also a heavily unionized environment. So there's some additional unique challenges around heavily unionized environments. So I don't want to paint a bleak picture, but I do want to paint a very honest picture of what needs to be done and also how quickly it needs to change to stay current with technological change and trends in the world, and to be part of the economic engine of a very vibrant state and a very vibrant region, the New England region. So putting all that together is, I need reinforcements.
And I think what's interesting is that you have Emily in the newest industry in life sciences. You have Rita in, as she indicates, and one of the oldest industries in this country, both faced with the same challenges. And so what do we do to advance the organization? And at the end of the day, what we're saying is so that you can be competitive in this space. So, Juan.
Just sort of final thoughts to underscore some of the points we've discussed. I think it's more important now than ever, given the racial discord that the country is unfortunately going through, that we continue to work hard at this, and it's gonna be quite a hill to climb. But it's important that it's not just about racial discord, but that we turn the conversation into the assets that come from diversity, because there are plenty of assets that we bring, that all of you bring to your organization by being multicultural, and then those who can be allies in the work. I think it's important for us to take action. I'm pleased to hear about Boston Scientific being part of the CEO action. Our CEO at Tufts Health Plan also signed that action, and he'll be attending the meeting in Manhattan amongst the 300 CEOs who are gathering November 10th to continue the conversation. So it is, so we move beyond this discord that we're seeing as a country and turn it into action, because there's a long way to go, but by convening leaders and convening all of us like we're doing today, I think we'll get there. We'll make it past the rough time that we're going through, and I think there's definitely a good place ahead of us. But it does take concerted effort, intentional effort from all of us to get to that point and not be discouraged, because it's easy to get discouraged.
I think that's an excellent point to shift to our questions. So thank you for reminding everyone of the discord that is today. And we choose to only think this is a blip in time, because we have to prevail because of what you've heard already about the advantage that diversity brings, and that the statistics, the McKinsey study, that the future is diverse, and the future is here today. So we have time for a few questions. Do we have anyone who would like to step up?
Hi, I'm also going to introduce myself. My name is Clarabel Santiago. I still have another 20 years I would like to work, but unfortunately at this time, I'm unemployed, and I have my master's degree in city planning, which I received in 2017. So I want to advance that, Rita, if you don't mind. But I also wanted to bring, the title of the topic tonight is of Boston has the power of now because of its history to bring truth to advance economic inclusion. If we collectively create a tool with data analysis on how corporations have benefited from the inception of America, free and low wage labor. That's a point that I just wanted to make. So I think we need to keep working on that tool to advance the inclusion. How that's going to look like, I don't know. I don't know. But I think there's a way that corporations and people are in denial. The 1% are in denial. So we need to come up and really bring it back a little bit. And not only advance it, but also look back, because we all benefited from this land and from free wages, from free labor.
We do, and we thank you for
So I
your
just wanted to
point
make that point.
and appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, thank you all for being here. My name's Jessica Zander. I work at YWCA Boston. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about representation at management and leadership levels as well as board levels. I hear you saying a lot about diversification of workforce, bringing folks in, and I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that, strategies, tactics, where we need to be going. Thank you.
Great question, Jessica. Who'd like to take that?
I can start. Well, I think having that type of information available is the starting point, transparency of that, so that so you don't hide behind the overall percentage of diversity, which if you simply look at, for instance, our company, we have pretty well represented staff. 32% are people of color. we're in healthcare, so it's about 60% or 65% are women. But you need to then look, to your point, at the next level up, and we do. We look at directors and above, and not surprisingly, like it is for many organizations, the percentages shrink. So first you need transparency about that data, and then you need to be intentional about connecting with the diverse talent that's out there. That's why organizations like the Partnership exist. And I don't know if Colette's still here, but Colette has done a great job pulling together lists of leaders in different industries. The Get Connected 100 came out last year, which highlighted a number of leaders. And then recently within life sciences and healthcare, the industry that I'm in, she put together a list of 50 distinguished individuals. And those are the folks that I handed over to our board of directors and our senior leadership and said, here's who to pick from if we want to diversify the board as we continue to diversify the board and senior leadership. So I think part of it is the traditional channels or the traditional networks that our organizations are familiar with are different from the ones that need to be made available to diversify the staff. So that's why I commend, and it looks like she may have left, folks like Colette, and certainly the Partnership for expanding the network to non-traditional networks for our people who are at the top.
And we know it all starts with at the top, and so I'd like to ask, what percentage of each of your boards are diverse? So Ron, we'll start with you.
Yep, so we have 45%, if you add people of color and women. So it's actually, we're fortunate to have a pretty diverse board of directors.
Rita?
So because we are a subsidiary of a global company, our board in France is French, and no surprise there. And it is not diverse. I think there's a...
But France has a requirement of women.
Yes, but there's only one woman on the board of the international group of Keolis in France. And locally, the board for Boston is comprised of 4 white males. It's a small...
So there's opportunity there, Rita.
Yes, and as I said earlier about Gerald, who stood up in the back, the senior leadership team at Keolis is 1 African-American male, Gerald, and 1 white female, Rita. So that's where we started. We have changed slightly since the inception of the contract 3 years ago. So there were 2 African-American males and 3 females, one of whom is Latina, and the other 2 are white.
Great. Emily?
At Boston Scientific, 20% of the board is female, and
I'm sorry?
20% of the board is female, and approximately 20% are people of color.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Our last question for the evening before we conclude.
My God, I have a closing shot. I'm Jean Horstman. I'm Chief Executive at Interise. We're a national nonprofit headquartered in Boston that grows established small businesses in low-income communities. Currently, 6,000 businesses across the United States have completed our Streetwise MBA. And Colette, if she's left out, she's one of our grads as well. My question grows, you encouraged us to ask the tough stuff, so I'm going to take you up on that. There's a report that the Association for Economic Opportunity recently published on the color of state of African American business in the U.S. And one of the things that identified, which was the most difficult gap to address after access to capital and access to procurement, was access to trust. And that until there is a shift on the trust level, then there's no systemic change. So I'd like to ask you, from your experience, how does a corporation move from a transactional approach when it's looking at supplier diversity to a trust-based approach?
What an interesting question, and it sounds like that's a focus on that CQ, the cultural intelligence, in order to make progress. But thank you. So I'll ask our panel. Juan, you want to begin? Rita.
So I think the way I would respond to that is to say that the efforts that we take are to try to establish relationships with vendors. And that means actually a lot of time spent in forums like this, but also going out to very small local chambers of commerce. There's a Hispanic American Chamber of Commerce. There's a Cape Verdean Chamber of Commerce. There's a number of different small entities that they're not as large as the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, and they are culturally and ethnically identified as such. And so it means getting on the phone. It means showing up in community centers and sometimes in restaurants and meeting with people from those groups and being present and listening and talking to people and extending the name of the company and the kinds of opportunities that we have to offer and how we're looking to partner with organizations. So I think of it as relationship building, which can be slow and pretty labor intensive, but it's not as simple as just going on an online directory and finding the name of a business that says it is minority owned. It's really taking the time to get to know people and let them get to know you. And also being very honest and straightforward about what we purchase and what we're looking for and what we're not. And it is a challenge on supplier diversity. I think we're doing quite well with it. We've met the targets that we're supposed to be meeting, and we've exceeded them for the last 3 years. But again, I go back to the old industry, and it's hard to find steel suppliers, for example. We buy steel to repair the rails. It's hard to find even an American company that can be a supplier of steel, much less a smaller corporation or a diverse corporation. So.
Anybody else?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's about relationships. It's not about go register on this page. It's about connecting with folks one-on-one and going to the community. So I would underscore the points that Rita brought up.
No, thank you. Thank you. Emily, any perspective on that? Again, this is tough stuff. It's important that we have honest conversations. It's important to acknowledge our past and the challenges that we've had, the reputation that we have, and the importance of changing. And that if we don't change, our businesses are going to fail. But we can't do this work alone, as we heard Jocelyn and Jocelyn's wonderful quote. It requires us to do this work together. And so I want to thank you for coming out tonight and for giving up your time to be with us, to listen to these individuals who put themselves on the line each and every day. So please help me thank our illustrious panel.